I thought I was going to die out there. I was prepared to die. Like I had to picture my brother and his family on the outside of my sled. The last time I got on my sled, I got out and I kissed that and I said goodbye to them. I was getting ready to pull out my Sharpie and start writing on my arm messages. I don't know, going from that, it was a feeling of fear to then a feeling of like coming to grips with, and this is it. And I think the only thing that kept me going is, like I said earlier, there's the inner voice that said, get up, you need to get moving. And where that inner voice came from, I don't know, but it's a voice that saved me, saved the team. Because otherwise I think I would have continued to lay there in the sled and would have fallen asleep, and it would have been a long, cold sleep. I finished the race that I needed to finish. I brought my 10 dogs back to Anchorage, and they're now back in their kennel, and they're happy and healthy. And I brought myself back, and I'm alive, and I can see the smile on my friends' faces, and share their laughter and their joy, and that's huge. That's bigger than any finish in any race.
Tell me a little bit about just your mental process going into like the day of the start, even the ceremonial start, the official start. How are you feeling at that time?
You go into both starts. There was nerves, definitely not the level of nerves I had in 2006 where I was throwing up. I was so nervous, but a little nervous, but very confident. I had a very, very strong team. I'd known that I'd trained enough, I'd gone over the gear enough. I felt I was confident enough to do this whole race again. So.
And again, you went into it not to win, but what was your main reason for going in? So
the main reason to go in was to take a team of dogs out for Karin and get her team ready for next year's race, to avoid them missing a year of training because of a car accident. So the goals, yeah, definitely not winning. The goals were not placing high. The goals were just to get them across the trail, safe, happy, with a good learning experience.
All right, when you get out there on the trail, how's it going at first? When do you have that moment of, this is a little tougher than I thought?
It was great. Leaving Fairbanks, awesome trails. The dogs are doing great. I was staying on the drag brake, trying to keep them going slower than what they wanted to go. We're passing teams left and right, trying to hang out behind Dallas Seavey because he's the guy. And we get to Nenana. I have to drop one dog because she came into season and was being quite a distraction to the boys. And even that wasn't too much of a problem. I mean, it's something I expect that you're going to be dropping dogs along the way. But going from Nenana to Tana, temperatures started getting colder, but they weren't bad. It was stuff that I'd seen before. Camped out, it's 40 below, not a big deal. Go from Tana to the next checkpoint, still cold. I mean, really not something that I was too worried about. You live in Alaska, you're going to see 20 below, on occasion maybe 40 below if you're out mushing. So.
When did it change?
When did it change? It changed going into Huslia. Going into Huslia, we had a long run of 80 some miles. I was traveling roughly with the Barrington twins, Charlie Banja, and one of the twins had a thermometer on her sled, and I had one on my sled, and we both saw our thermometers bottom out at 60 below. It pegged, it couldn't go any lower, and that was when we were up at the upper parts of the trail, and there was parts where we dropped down, and the temperatures, we could feel them drop. So guessing 70, 75 below, and that's when it changed. It became a little bit more difficult there. I'm going to be a lot more conscious about what we were doing for ourselves and what we were doing for the dogs. Taking off gloves for a minute was something that was not something you do, for fear of freezing your fingers and not being able to use them to be able to take care of the dogs. Having to watch out that we were feeding the dogs extra. We're watering the dogs extra because they exert so much more when the temperatures are like that. Making sure that we're stopping at a shelter cabin so that we could rest warm, not necessarily sleep warm. But that's where things started showing that this was going to be a different Iditarod, not the Iditarod of 2006, which was almost a magic carpet ride for me.
We've had such a mild winter.
Yeah.
Were you, taken by surprise by the conditions out there?
I guess not completely taken by surprise. You never take Alaska and Alaska's weather for granted. I did go into this race with a parka in my, not parka, pardon me, a poncho in my sled bag, prepared for rain. And I'd taken all my cold weather gear, and I expected to use that poncho more than I did some of my extra cold weather gear. So not a complete surprise, but 75 below, I don't think you're ever prepared for that.
What does it feel? I mean, you mentioned before, sometimes you have to take your gloves off, or you have to expose some part of your face or something. How do you mentally even prepare for that? What is it, is it stinging? To explain sort of the sensation.
At temperatures like that, I don't take off my gloves. I take off my mittens, and I still have a thin liner glove on. And it's thin enough that I can still manipulate snaps of the dogs. I can do all the chores. I can put dog booties on. I just don't want to expose skin to that risk, because as soon as you get frostbite in your fingers, as we saw with people like Iditarod and other mushers, you lose the ability to really work with the dogs and work with gear, and it becomes more of a survival situation for you than a mushing racing situation, and I didn't want to get to that point.
Okay, so that's when it started to, change. When did it start to get really bad? What happened? What did you encounter?
So, going from Unalakleet to Shaktoolik, beautiful run. You climb up into the Blueberry Hills. It's a 20-30 degree temperature day. Bluebird skies, just clear as can be. You could see for miles and miles. I couldn't ask for a better run. But you drop down from the Blueberry Hills, going towards Shaktoolik, you get to the bottom, and as soon as you get down onto the lagoon, the winds pick up. And we're seeing drifts across the trail that were 2 to 3 feet high in some sections that you're having to break through with the dogs, you're having to weave around with the dogs. So there's a lot of G-haw commands with the dogs to manipulate them on the trail, keep them on the trail, while fighting a crosswind that was upwards of 25, 30 miles an hour, but still doable. You still see the markers, you still see where you're going, and it's a 13-mile run roughly into Shaktoolik. Getting to Shaktoolik, I have a scheduled, I think it's about a 6-hour rest I'd planned, and as that 6 hours started approaching, the other mushers that are in the checkpoint ahead of me were saying, you know what, these winds are picking up way too much. We're going to hold out. Went out there, and we were seeing winds reaching upwards of 30 miles an hour, and there are headwinds that we'd have to go into. So at that point, the mushers that I was with were all saying, you know what, let's hold out, we'll wait until things die off. And we waited, and we waited. We had eventually a pilot come in with a commercial crew. He talked to the weather stations, and the weather station said, you know what, I mean, it's going to last for a long time. You're looking 48 hours plus before things start to die off. Said we had a window coming up between 6 and 9 p.m., about 25 hours after I'd stopped there initially. We had
your 6 hours turned to 25?
Yeah, 6 hours turned to 25 hours and 10 minutes. But we had a window that opened up between 6 and 9 p.m. where he said the winds are going to die down here a little bit. Now we asked how much a little bit was. He said he couldn't quantify. He said it looks like it's just going to die down. And he says the closer you get to Koyuk, the winds are going to die down quite a bit more. Koyuk, the winds are going about 15 miles an hour. So we all started talking. We're talking about packing up our gear, packing up our teams, and mushing together in groups. Linwood Fiedler and I and Ben Harper all were the first 3 to get our stuff together. Linwood led us out, and we took out 6:30, 7 o'clock, and the winds, they were rough. They were maybe 20, 25 miles an hour, gusts a little bit more than that. Mushed out, boy, it was still daylight, probably mushed out another hour, hour and a half, past a little shelter cabin on Moses Point, where eventually Lance Mackey and his brother and Chuck Schaefer had stopped at to rest. But we passed that. Winds still weren't too bad. You could still see the trail markers, but the whole time we're busting through huge drifts, upwards of 3, maybe 4 feet in some of them. Drifts that were 25, 30 feet long that you'd have to just weave around. So some more of that calling G and haw with the dogs, command them around to find the trail, looking for the trail markers, which were spaced out sometimes upwards of a quarter to a mile apart, searching the ground for marks of the trail that had been there. You could see some of the sled markers, but it became quite challenging at that point.
What was visibility like in those conditions?
Visibility was ranging from where I could see a dog team in front of me to 2 dog teams in front of me, all the way down to where I could see just my wheel dogs, so maybe 15 feet in front of me.
Was it constantly changing?
Constantly changing. The winds would be a constant 25, 30 miles an hour, and then they'd gust up and be what seemed like double that. They were constantly one direction, coming from the north.
How are the dogs reacting to this?
You know, the dogs are charging straight through it. The leaders, I could see where they're getting a little bit tired, and their job is to run up there and show everybody the path to go. Their job is to keep the line tight and kind of set the pace for the other dogs. But their job also is to really listen to me and process what they're seeing on the trail and make decisions based on what I'm saying, what they're seeing on the trail. And that's mentally taxing. That'd be like you or I driving down a 4-lane highway in the middle of a blizzard and only being able to see the taillights of the car directly in front of you for hours and hours and hours. And I mean, you're on 100%. And I think I started seeing them mentally get tired, but you're out in the middle of sea ice, and it's not a place where you can just pull over to a rest stop and camp out until things die down.
All right, so you had to keep going. Interesting to me. I mean, you could always see or know that other mushers were nearby.
Not really. You know, eventually we started separating out. Both Linwood and Ben Harper had much faster teams than mine, and very rapidly Linwood pulled away from me. Very rapidly Ben Harper had caught up with me, passed me, and disappeared off into the darkness at that point. So it really was, at that point, just my team. Going from trail marker to trail marker, utilizing our headlamp to try to catch the little reflectors on our trail markers, and hoping to catch little glimpses of what existed of the trail.
How long did that go on?
We continued on till it's about 2 o'clock when we stopped being able to see some trail markers. I remember leaving one trail marker and had clocked with the GPS the distance between one trail marker to another earlier, and seen that there's some times where we went a mile at a time. So I left one trail marker, went about a mile, and still had not seen another trail marker, stopped, and started searching around quite a bit more. Looked behind me, couldn't even see where I'd come from. The wind had completely windswept where I'd been. And at that point, I knew I wasn't in trouble per se with being on the trail, because I still was able to maintain a northern course, and Quake was to the north, and that's where the wind was.
Have you ever mushed in those conditions before?
Not in a race. I've had some really strong winds in training, but never to that extent in a race.
What does that do to your adrenaline in that moment?
You know, it's a real sense of calm. And I think all of my mushing experience, all my outdoor adventure experience has really taught you that you get into situations, getting your adrenaline pumped up, getting excited, getting anxious about something is not going to do you any good. If anything, it's going to distract your brain from making good, solid decisions. So at that point, it really was a calm. I had processed through everything. Okay, this is where the trail was when I left. This is where Quake should be. This is where the wind's coming from. If I follow the wind this way, this is what I might have to do if we can't get to Quake. So I mean, it was a calm, but a keen awareness of this isn't a good thing, and things could go wrong real quick.
So what happened next?
So we went for another hour, me trying to haul the dogs or take the dogs left over to where the trail should be. They're very strong right-pawed dogs. They wanted to generally trend to the right. So it was a lot of work, a lot of me yelling, ha, 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 and them busting through huge drifts, strong winds, mentally just getting exhausted.
Did you find that?
And we didn't. Eventually, I can't remember what dog it was that backed off to take a bathroom break, and once that dog stopped, the whole team stops. And once the dog was done, calling up the team to try to go, they wouldn't go. At that point, some of them had started curling up, others had started sitting down, licking their feet, something to do when they're done with a run. I got off the sled, walked out in front, grabbed the line that the leaders were attached to, and started walking out in front of them, and tried to haul the dogs. I tried for maybe a mile to get them going again, and they'd have nothing with it. They're mentally exhausted. They're ready for a break.
Had you seen that happen before with dogs, where they just say, "I'm done"?
I've never, no. But I've never gone that distance and that much of a challenge with the dogs. So.
Can you blame them?
No. You have to have that mental toughness to push through things, and I'm not that leader. I'm not up there that whole time. I'm back behind the sled. Yes, I'm going through some mental strain trying to make those decisions for the team and process everything, but to do what they're doing, I mean, they're amazing animals. They're amazing athletes. To be able to go as far as they did in those winds, that blew me away. And for as young as they were, that was outstanding.
So when did you say, okay, I'm gonna? So
after about a mile, it just could not physically pull them, could not keep them going. So this is it. We need to stop. Well, there's no choice. We are stopped, and took the sled and turned it perpendicular to the wind, so I could then ball the dogs up behind the sled, so they had a nice windbreak. And then at that point, I sat down. I realized that, I mean, the winds are 20, 30 miles an hour, gusts jumping up well above that. The air temperatures, I'm guessing, were maybe 10, 20. So you add on that wind chill, start thinking about what could happen if we're not able to get going again, and pulled out the spot tracker and flipped open the SOS latch and pushed the red SOS button, and was prepared to call it a race for the safety of those dogs. I knew I could survive out there, but I knew that it could be a really rough night for those dogs, and that wasn't fair to them.
So when you hit that button, did it work?
I hit that button, went into my sled bag, pulled my sleeping bag over me, and laid there. I pulled out my headlamp off my head. I hung it up on top of my sled. That way, if a crew came, that they'd be able to see the light and help them find me. Laid there for an hour. Wasn't really expecting a crew to come out right away because of the winds, but was questioning whether the tracker was working. So I went out, pulled it out again, pushed the SOS button again, and then went back in the sled. I did that after another hour, and so 3 hours had passed. Laid there, I went from being extremely cold myself to shaking just uncontrollably, to finally the shaking stopping. And it was really at that point that I started getting worried for not only the dog's safety at that point, but now I was starting to get concerned about my own safety. Knowing the stages of hypothermia and how things work with the body, and I knew that I was getting to a point where when you stop shaking, you're either warming up or you're starting to cool down. And started really worrying. I had looked out and seen the dogs were completely drifted over. I could see the tail of one dog. At that point, it was definitely not a race. It was more of survival mode. Laid in the sled bag for a couple more hours, total time of being stopped there for about 6 hours. And a voice in my head was screaming at me, get up, we're not done, we gotta get moving. By the time it was daylight, I'd come to the conclusion that the winds were too strong for Iditarod to send out any search and rescue crews. I mean, we know that you never put other people's lives at risk to just save one person's life. I accepted that. So I got up, went to the dogs, like I said, I could only see the tail of one dog, had to break them free, and the drifts that they were under were they're rock hard. You could walk over top of the drifts and not collapse. But broke the dogs free. Because they'd curled up, they'd use those natural instincts. They'd create their own little snow caves. They had their nice air pockets. They stayed warm. They could breathe. It was a beautiful survival thing to see them doing exactly what they're supposed to do and it working. But got them all broken free and lined them out going north, got my sled relined out and called them up, and they weren't ready to go.
They weren't?
No. It definitely wasn't a normal checkpoint situation where you're waking up and, hey, we're getting ready to go. It was, we had a long sleep, and there's no set trail. There's nothing to follow. They were questioning. So again, I got out in front of them, and I probably walked out in front of them for another mile, 2 miles. The whole time.
Walk with you, but they wouldn't.
They'd walk and follow me, but they wouldn't move forward with me back on the sled. The whole time I'm going, and I'd see the swing dogs and the dogs behind the swing dogs come up beside me, and at that point I'd be like, oh, great, and run back to the sled. And as soon as I got back to the sled, they'd stop. So I'd go back up there, I'd take some of those dogs that were initially trying to pass me, and I'd put them up into lead. Go back to the sled, call them up, nothing. So I ended up walking up in front of them, and this just happened over and over and over with so many pairs of dogs. The initial dogs I started off with, Muddy, and who was just outstanding 1.5-year, 2-year-old dog who ran last year. And I had moved her back in the team because she just didn't want to. But eventually, she was one of those dogs that just kept rushing forward to me and put her up in the lead. And she's the one that finally got us moving without me being up in front.
When did help ever come? When did you find people again?
So we're moving, it's daylight. I can see off to my east some mountains, and we travel for about an hour, and the winds break enough where I can see mountains off to my west too, and I know that that's where Koyuk is. But my dogs are still insistent on going directly into the wind. So we're going past where Koyuk is, and we're going up into a little river slough. But I'm able to slowly get them to haw over enough to get close to where this ridge line would be. And at this point, I get into somewhat of a lee of the wind behind a little rise.
Are you walking?
Nope, mushing. The dogs are running. I see a stand of trees. Initially I thought I saw a shelter cabin with it. I thought, oh, this is great. We passed by, there's no shelter cabin. It's just a stand of like 6 to 12 spruce trees. But I mark it mentally in my head as when we're there and passing it, it's about as calm as the wind had been the whole time. And we try to go past it and go west. And I figure once I go west, I'll hit this ridge line and I can follow it south all the way to Koyuk and have the wind to our back. We got maybe 100 yards past that sheltered spot. The wind picked right up again, and the dogs flipped up their tails and told me no way. And they sat down again. And I got out and tried walking, nothing would have it. So eventually I turned them back around on the trail we come and mushed them right back to that stand of trees and parked them there, gave him my last snack, and went to we had one big spruce tree that I saw that was providing quite a bit of wind block, and I went to the other trees and started stripping off boughs to start making a snow shelter.
Survival.
And yeah, total survival mode. Once I had a snow tunnel cut out and had some boughs laid up to protect it, I went back to that spot tracker. I'd built up enough personal warmth doing all that work. It was starting to feel good, and it was starting to warm up, and the wind wasn't there whipping all of our heat away. I went to that spot tracker, pulled it out to look at it, and when I looked at it, there was no lights. And during this whole race, I'm looking at these two trackers tagged onto the front of my sled, and they're flashing every 2 seconds or so. And this thing's suddenly not flashing, it has no lights at all. I'm like, great, it got too cold, which kind of didn't make sense since it survived at 75 below. But I put it inside my parka, and I continue working, hoping that it warms up and it'll be fine. Continue working on that shelter, pull it out, it's still not lit up. And I thought, man, this isn't gonna work. I assumed that it was one of these battery ones that you have to plug into a unit and recharge. But look closer to it in the back, there's some screw-offs, and I unscrewed it, and it had 4 AA batteries in there. And luckily, this whole race I've been using my own GPS for tracking speed and distance, and that GPS utilized AAA batteries, and I was able to pull out my spare batteries and plug fresh ones in there. And as soon as I plugged them in there, lights popped on. And
did you have a little hope?
I had there's a whole lot of hope at that point. As soon as the lights popped on, flipped open the lid on the SOS button, pushed that red button again, and then set that tracker down. Still thinking, last time I pushed it, nothing happened. I'm not going to rely on this piece of technology. When we go into this race, we have to be self-sufficient. It's nice to have this little safety backup, but you don't rely on it. You don't make decisions based on the fact that you can rely on that. So I tossed it aside, went back to work in the shelter. And 15, 30 minutes into working on the shelter, I hear a hum. And I thought, you're hearing things. It can't be a snow machine. It's not anything. And I continue working, and it gets louder. I'm like, wait a minute. I just remember sprinting out of that snow tunnel, and I see the snow machine just sail on by. Like, And then just as my hopes drop, this second one following behind him comes into view. And I just waving my arms like crazy and screaming at this guy and running out towards him and dropping into snow drifts that were waist deep and just swimming through the snow to get to this guy. He stops his machine and rush up to his sled. And he's ripping off his face mask, and even before he's done ripping his face mask off, I'm telling him that I did ride musher and I've been out here for this long, and I'm calling my dogs are in danger, and I need to get to Koyuk, and just all these things are flying out of my mouth, and I'm sure I'm making very little sense to him at all.
You didn't know if he was or wasn't a rescuer?
I didn't. I assumed that he was just someone out riding, and he stops me, and he says, I know, we've been looking for you. And this is like 18, 19-year-old kid. And I just wrap my arms around him and give him the biggest hug in the world. And by that point, the guy who had passed by had turned around, come back, and this kid says, "You're thirsty?" And I'm like, yes. I mean, my water had been frozen hours and hours ago from when we had first stopped. And he pulls out a bottle of water, and the sweetest tasting thing. Tastes better than any drink I've had. And he and his buddy asked, we can break trail and you can follow us. Koyuk's about 5 miles down the way. I said, my dogs, I don't think they're gonna follow any trail. I had to stop here because they were done. So anyway, you can go back and get a freight sled and we can haul them back in that. And they said, sure. They said, we're gonna head back. I said, it's about 5 miles. It'll take us a little while to round up some sleds, come back, but we'll come back and get you. and they took off.
And then you were alone again, but did you know that they would be back?
Oh, I fully believe that they'd be back. And also the hope, knowing that, you know, they say Koyuk is only 5 miles away. In reality, it was probably more than that. But it was where I thought it was. And it was that close. Whether they came back to me or not, I knew after rest, I could at least make that distance.
How long before they came back again?
They never came back. It was 2 other guys that came back. I think I sat huddled up in that shelter out of the wind, so relieved. And within another 15, 20 minutes, a second pair of snow machines came, one that had a freight sled. And we took the dogs and put them inside this freight sled that had a tarp in it, clipped them off to the rails on it, flipped the tarp over them, cinched that down. That way they'd be protected from the wind, but also that way they felt secure and they'd stay in the sled. And then tied my sled off to the other snow machine and took off down the trail. It's an amazing ride.
How long from that initial stop, I guess the day before or whatever, to when they came to rescue you, do you know?
See, I left Koyuk, I left Shaktuluk 6 or 7 o'clock in the evening. I don't know what day it was. Mush till about 3 a.m., that initial stop, that next morning. Woke up, did the second mush. I probably left 9, 10 o'clock in the morning. And then mush till probably 3 in the afternoon that next day. So, I mean, it was almost 24 hours. And I got into Koyuk maybe 4 or 5 o'clock, so I think we're probably 22, 23 hours out
there
on a run that should have been, you know, you saw the Barrington twins do it in 8 hours, saw other mushers doing it 10 to 12 hours, but being out there almost double that.
So what do you think happened in your case, if other mushers made it through? Do you think it was the age of the dogs? Was it just you got that one gust that was...
You know, I think a perfect storm of a lot of factors. Yeah, we got off the trail a little bit. The dogs are slowly veering G instead of Haw towards where Koyuk is. Getting gusts, getting winds, getting dogs that are mentally getting tired. It's really hard to tell. I bet if I'd gone out there with the team a day later, it would have been a totally different story. If I'd gone out there with maybe another group of mushers who were running at a different speed and we could constantly see another team, that mental encouragement could have been enough to keep the dogs going. A lot of what ifs could have happened, but they didn't. And I mean, ultimately, my concern for the dogs and my decisions based on the concerns for the dogs led to making the right decisions, keeping them safe and healthy. In turn, I guess, kept me safe and healthy too.
So you're back now. The dogs survived. You survived. Where are you mentally? Can you even say you're anywhere to say, is this something you would do again?
You know, Scott Jansen, the mushing mortician, we're sitting in Shaktuluk, and the funny thing is, one of the things he had said to all the mushers, we had 20 people packed into this little checkpoint. One of the things he had told us is, you know, if anything happens to you guys in the next 3 days, I'll take care of all the expenses. Yeah, laying there, you know, his little commercials here in town, like going through my head. But we both got into Koyuk. He had a situation where he was on the ice too, and he pushed the SOS button. We're sitting there talking Koyuk, and he pulled me aside and said, you know, I have 3 teams in Canuck. He says, next year, let's get together and let's get these dogs trained. Let's go out again. Let's do it again. Am I ready to take him up on that offer? No, I'm not ready to make that decision. I'm happy that that option is there, but right now, there's a lot of things to think about. It really brings life into perspective when you go through something like that, and you know, I got a lot of thinking to do. Mushing is definitely something that's in my blood. It's a passion. I love being out there, I love meeting all the people in the checkpoints, the kids at the checkpoints that come out and visit me, and the dogs and all the other mushers. The camaraderie that we have with the dogs and the other mushers out there, I mean, it's amazing. But I can't say at this point whether I'm ready to retire or whether I'm ready to accept Scott's challenge and take another team out on the trail.
So you're a teacher,
Yep.
Literary coach, you said?
Literacy coach, yep.
Literacy coach. So you're going to go back to work tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
Kids are going to ask questions, people are going to have questions.
Yep.
Do you have sort of a statement ready for everybody? Was there a lesson learned or something that you want to pass on?
I don't have a canned statement ready for them. Yeah, I mean, the biggest lesson is, I mean, you go into whatever challenge it is in life prepared as well as you can be. You go into it with as much background knowledge as you need and ready for any challenges that may come along the way. You can't prepare for every single challenge, but you can prepare for most. And when those challenges occur, you have to maintain that calm and make the best decision at that moment and take it step by step. It's just like the race as a whole. You can't run 1,000 miles. You have to run it checkpoint to checkpoint or run to run. You have to maintain a calm and keep that focus and keep pushing on. And no matter how tough the challenges are, you can usually push through. Don't give up.